What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show. My name is Steven Andress, and we are very excited to welcome in two members of the Radio.com Sports staff into this week's show discussing off-season winners as you get ready for the fantasy draft season. Joining me this week is Jordan Cohn, the 2019 champion of the Radio.com Sports Expert Fantasy Football League, along with Jesse Pantusco, the resident Jacksonville Jaguars fan of our staff. Minshew Mania in the house for this off-season winners edition. In this episode, we are going to give our picks for players among quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that we believe are off-season winners in fantasy. Their situations improved from the end of last season, raising their stock for the 2020 campaign. So let's start at quarterback. And Jordan, who is your off-season winner among QBs?
Well, this one's not going to blow any minds, but I'm going to go with Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. And I think one name is pretty sufficient in determining why I'm making that pick. DeAndre Hopkins, probably the biggest trade acquisition of the entire offseason. He's going to fix so many problems that Murray dealt with last season, including the league-high sacks that Murray took in the backfield. He can extend the play with his legs, which one, helps his fantasy value, but two, hurt his actual quarterback value at times because he would go down in the backfield looking for some option somewhere on the field. Hopkins is really going to help him in that area. And additionally, the air raid offense that Kingsbury runs is going to be perfect for Murray as it was last season. He was a fine fantasy football quarterback last year in his rookie year with a depleted offensive line and with no real wide receiver one. You can say what you want about Fitzgerald and Kirk, but they were either off questionable or Fitzgerald is aging. Hopkins is there now. They have a better offensive line with Josh Jones in the draft. And it's showing in his average draft position in the 5th round. People are catching on. It's not rocket science. I would be wary of how early you're willing to take him, as there are plenty of options on the board, but I do see a market improvement in store for Murray.
Yeah, Murray available in the 5th round right now, average draft position. Jesse, you're going the other end of the spectrum, not quite the hype train of a second-year player. You're taking Old Faithful here.
Yeah. My pick here is, I also want to say that, well, one, I agree with Jordan's pick a lot. I think I really like Kyler Murray's rushing potential, which you're not going to get at all with Tom Brady. Not really a historically super athletic guy. And it's kind of almost feels blasphemous to say that his situation is improving by going from the Patriots, who won 6 Super Bowls throughout his reign there, to Tampa Bay, who hasn't had a lot of success recently. But the supporting cast in Tampa Bay is just far superior to anything Brady was dealing with last season, when he was basically just throwing to Edelman, an aging slot receiver, and whatever running backs they were using that game. They had Antonio Brown for one game. Josh Gordon was in and out of the lineup. N'Keal Harry was injured. And now he's inheriting this stacked receiving core with Chris Godwin, who blew up last year, is coming off a year where he had over 1,000 yards. Mike Evans. And they even had a good draft too, and brought in a 5th round wide receiver in Tyler Johnson, who went for over 1,000 yards at the University of Minnesota as a junior last year. And obviously bringing Rob Gronkowski out of retirement. So we know the chemistry is going to be there. So you're not going to get the added rushing value that a guy like Kyler Murray or Lamar Jackson would bring. But I think it's a good bounce back spot for Brady, who, unlike Jameis Winston, he's not going to turn the ball over. I believe he had 29 interceptions combined his last 4 seasons, which is one fewer than Jameis had all of last season, actually.
Yeah, famous Jameis, 30 picks last year. I'm not going to shock anybody with my offseason winner among quarterbacks, but we would be remiss without mentioning Dak Prescott, ADP in the middle of the 6th round last year. I should say ADP in the middle of the 6th round this year. the contract holdout situation doesn't concern me. Worst case, he's going to play on the franchise tag, in my opinion. But if you look at what happened around him on that Cowboys team, yes, they hired a new coach, and I do value continuity this year in fantasy with no offseason programs and teams going straight to training camp. But they did retain offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, who is the mastermind of that Dak Prescott breakout a year ago, where he finished as the number 3 quarterback in fantasy football. They bring back Amari Cooper on a free agent deal. Michael Gallup is still there. And they draft, in my opinion, the most talented wide receiver in this draft class in CeeDee Lamb. So I don't see any reason why Dak Prescott can't repeat as the QB3 in 2020. Let's move on to our offseason winners among running backs. And Jesse, I'm going to start with you because this guy has been skyrocketing up draft boards just in the past month.
Yeah, Kenyan Drake. He's, as you alluded to, not really necessarily a bargain, probably going around that first, second round turn, right? That maybe 12 to 15 range. But he was awesome last year. As soon as he exited Miami, he was the RB4 from week 9 on, which is when he landed in Arizona and sort of took over the starting job for David Johnson, who was traded this offseason. So Drake is one of the few running backs that is positioned for a true workhorse role. But I think it's going to be an improved offense with DeAndre Hopkins, leads to more scoring opportunities, which obviously Drake will stand to benefit from. And, I have a lot of faith in Cliff Kingsbury to employ him in creative ways.
Yeah, for me, it's another guy who's kind of going around that 1-2 turn. I've seen him taken as early as the 6th overall pick and as late as, pick 16, 17 is Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. And I know there are reports of a possible contract holdout with Mixon, but this year in particular, I'm not concerned about that. And it's because of the new CBA. The collective bargaining agreement now says players will lose an accrued season towards free agency by failing to show up for training camp or by leaving camp for more than 5 days. Now, the old CBA said they could still not show up until 30 days before the first regular season game before they would lose that accrued season towards free agency. So I really don't see how Joe Mixon has any leverage whatsoever to even miss training camp at this point with the new CBA. But just from a fantasy standpoint, if you look at the numbers from last season, Mixon was averaging 19.6 touches per game. That was 11th among running backs. But if you dice it up a little bit from after their bye week, from week 10 on, he went up to 24 touches per game, which would have only been behind Christian McCaffrey for the season. And he was running back 6 overall on the fantasy year from week 10 on after the bye week, despite having the number 26 offensive line in adjusted line yards per Football Outsider. So the Bengals didn't add anything to this backfield in the offseason. The offensive line should be a little bit better. And I see the entire offense in general just being improved with Joe Burrow at quarterback now. So maybe you could argue Joe Mixon will see a few less touches in an offense that's not going to be as run heavy with a rookie quarterback trying to be better. And if Joe Burrow's as good as everybody thinks he is, they're going to be a little bit more pass happy. But I think that could be balanced out too by more touchdown opportunities. I mean, we're talking about a guy who was a top 6 running back in the second half of the year last year in one of the worst offenses we have ever seen. So I'm really high on Joe Mixon going into 2020 and finding maybe as my RB2 in the second round if he slips to that point. And, Jesse and I both talked about a guy in this range of drafts. And ironically, Jordan, you also have a guy that's kind of going in this range of drafts as well. This kind of happened organically. We all made our picks. And as it turns out, all 3 of these guys could be names that we all have to decide on in that early second round potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Along the same vein as you guys, I went with Austin Ekeler. He's going in the middle of the second round. He was obviously a phenomenal breakout story last season, the top running back in the game throughout the first few weeks of the season in terms of fantasy value. He was rivaling Christian McCaffrey as early as week 6 for the leader in PPR scoring. His performance dropped slightly after the return of Melvin Gordon. That's not going to be a problem this year, and it's not like he lost all his relevance. He was still a weekly RB1, RB2 candidate. And Joe Kelly and Justin Jackson are the 2 other running backs in that Chargers backfield. Neither of them really concerned me as to someone who could vulture those carries away from Ekeler. And really, I think that the offense as a whole is going to be on the shoulders of Ekeler throughout the season. No matter who's starting at quarterback at any point, I don't see Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert really having, a phenomenal season that changes everyone's opinions on what they are as far as 2020 is concerned. And a lot of people are saying that Ekeler's success hinged a lot on Rivers' play style and Rivers' tendency to kind of dump it off to him. I think that Ekeler is going to have a similar role for one of these new quarterbacks in the system. They're going to look for a guy who's open on shorter, easy routes, kind of as a safety valve, a security blanket. And as far as consistency and a high floor are concerned, I really don't see too many better options in the second round than Ekeler.
All right, let's move on to wide receivers, our offseason winners. I'll kick it off on this one. I like Calvin Ridley. He's going in the early fourth round right now in average draft position. I'm not the first one to say this, and I won't be the last. I just think he's this year's Chris Godwin, the major breakout candidate among wide receivers. And when I say that, what I mean is he's a team's wide receiver 2 that I think will be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. So I think both Ridley and Julio Jones will be wide receiver 1s in fantasy this year. The Falcons vacated 258 targets from last year. The next closest team in the NFL was the Cowboys with 190. That is a ton of targets with 2 receivers in Jones and Ridley who are going to take over the majority of those targets and maybe add some from their totals from a year ago. That's 39% of their 2019 targets are now up for grabs and available. And after the Mohamed Sanu trade last year mid-season from week 8 on, Ridley was the wide receiver 7 in PPR fantasy points per game, averaging 17.8 per game. And then from week 11 to week 13, with both no Mohamed Sanu and no Austin Hooper, who is injured and now is in Cleveland, Ridley averaged 22.5 PPR points per game. I just think this guy is just such an obvious breakout candidate and is still a value in the 4th round. Jordan, who you got?
I'm going to go with another team's wide receiver 2 that I think holds wide receiver 1 potential, at least in terms of fantasy scoring. DK Metcalf in Seattle. My last memory of watching Metcalf was when my Eagles were absolutely trounced by him throughout the whole entire game, especially on that last deep ball that effectively ended our chances. But he's one of 6 rookie wide receivers in the past 5 seasons to record 900 receiving yards in the same company as Michael Thomas, Amari Cooper, Juju Smith-Schuster. It's a pretty niche group for me to kind of phrase that statistic around. But, I mean, it shows that he made a really big impact for a rookie wide receiver, which doesn't happen as often as you might think, given a lot of the hype of these guys coming out of school. So his chemistry with Russell Wilson is only going to improve this year. If the playoffs were any indication, I think that Wilson can trust him as a go-to guy in big game situations. And the red zone targets are something that I would look in Metcalf's direction for as well. Josh Gordon and Jaron Brown, most likely Josh Gordon isn't going to be there. Those were 2 guys that Wilson looked to often in the red zone. Neither of them are going to be there. And some of the guys that are being selected above him, at least on ESPN's ADP, Deebo Samuel, Jarvis Landry, Devontae Parker. I really just don't understand why you would ignore Metcalf's easy 1,000-yard, 8-touchdown potential in his second year.
Solid choice, Jesse. You have an older prospect again, but one you can't argue with the target potential here.
Yeah, I feel like just, looking at ADPs and early drafts so far, I think people are forgetting just how good Adam Thielen was as recently as 2018 when he finished 4th in the league with 113 catches, was also 7th in targets that year. And he's coming off a bit of a down year. Before he got hurt, though, he was having a great year. He was the wide receiver 13 in PPR on the strength of 6 touchdowns through his first 7 games. And I consider him an offseason winner because Stephon Diggs was obviously traded to Buffalo. And Thielen who has never really had an injury past. He had played 87 straight games before getting hurt last year with a hamstring soft tissue injury. He's had the offseason to heal up. And the Vikings just signed Kirk Cousins to a $66 million extension, which is not game manager money. I think they want to take advantage of him and throw the ball a little bit more this year. And I think a healthy Adam Thielen going around, that wide receiver 1-2 fringe is a nice value there.
Yeah, guys like Thielen are why I'm taking running back in the first 2 rounds in a lot of my drafts this year. We'll see how it plays out closer to August, but all great points there on Thielen. Let's move on to off-season winners among tight ends, and I'll start off here with Tyler Higbee of the Los Angeles Rams, going in the late 7th round of average draft position right now. Brandon Cooks is gone from this offense. The last 5 games, he averaged 8.6 receptions for 104 yards. He had 2 touchdowns in that span. That's 21.4 PPR points per game for a tight end. He was the number 1 tight end by more than 4 PPR points per game in that span. The last 5 weeks of 2019, the Rams shifted to more 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets. 35.7% of their plays in the final 5 weeks were in 12 personnel. They only ran 12 personnel less than 10% of the time in 2018. And if you look at the splits from weeks 1 through 12 last year to 13 through 17, you see a large offensive improvement for the Rams using more of that 12 personnel. And just listen to the head coach. That's the big question. Will they continue to do this in 2020? And Sean McVay earlier this offseason was quoted as saying, I think it's not a coincidence that a lot of Jared Goff's really good play coincided with when Tyler Higbee ended up playing really well. We've got big plans for Higbee. And I don't see any reason why he can't be among one of the 6 best tight ends in fantasy football this year, with all of the hints and nuggets that are being dropped and all the statistical evidence to go along with it as well. So he's a little pricey among tight ends, late 7th. We have a deep sleeper option here from Jordan.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset, I'm of the philosophy that you should wait on your tight ends, just like you should wait on your quarterbacks. I understand the value of getting, receiver type production out of a guy like Kelsey or Kittle or Ertz. However, Higbee is a perfect example of someone who was not drafted by my count by anyone last year. And look at what he did down the stretch. He was a big reason why I had a lot of success in some of the leagues where I picked him up. So I'm going to go with Chris Herndon of the New York Jets. People are forgetting about his 2018 campaign before his career kind of went off the rails a little bit due to suspension and injury, among other issues. The Jets added some help in the passing game this offseason in Rashad Perriman and Denzel Mims through the draft, but neither of those names scream out to me as the go-to guy in that offense. I still think that's going to be Jamison Crowder, but I think that Chris Herndon could step up and be the number 2 most targeted guy by Darnold should he stay healthy. They showed great chemistry in 2018. A great statistic pulled from our New York affiliate WFAN. By the 2018 campaign second half, Herndon was a top 10 PFF tight end. He was 9th in receptions in the league at his position. He was putting up top 10 fantasy value. For someone that you might not even have to expend a draft pick on in 2020, I think that Herndon has great value and an even higher ceiling.
Yeah, I like that name. I like Jesse's name here as well. This is another guy that's on my radar for 2020.
Yeah, I guess this would fall into the sleeper category as well, though I'm looking in some recent ADPs, and it seems like people are starting to catch on to Hayden Hurst a little bit. And I like him for the same reason that we talked about Calvin Ridley earlier. I think there's a lot of volume available in Atlanta. We know Matt Ryan likes to target tight ends. He targeted Austin Hooper, who defected to Cleveland in free agency on 18% of his passes last year. I also saw a ton of red zone opportunities. I believe only Travis Kelce and Tyler Higbee saw more red zone looks than Hooper last year. And Hayden Hurst, who's coming over from Baltimore, never really had a chance to shine there because he was behind Mark Andrews in the pecking order. So he comes over and steps right into this role. Should see a lot of targets. One of the more affordable, starting tight ends, I think, available in fantasy right now. And I know he's no spring chicken at 26, but he is a guy that has first round pedigree. It was the number 1 tight end the year he got drafted. So I think he's kind of I was going to say under the radar, but maybe not so much anymore if we keep talking about him, breakout candidate in 2020.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show. I want to thank Jesse Pantusco and Jordan Cohn for joining us this week. You can follow their work at Radio.com Sports on Twitter. Jordan is at Jordan Cohn, COHN, and then the number 2.
Recently verified, too.
Yes. Congratulations on the check mark, sir. Big day. And Jesse Pantusco, PANTUOSCO on Twitter. Thank you again for joining us, guys. If you want some more fantasy content here on our YouTube channel, our first 2 episodes from 2020 delved into dynasty rankings among running backs and wide receivers. Thank you for joining us, though, this week for off-season winners, and we'll see you next time here on the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show.